My name is Marissa Lane, and I'm 34 years old. For most of my life, I believed family was the one thing you could count on. I sacrificed for them, carried their burdens, and convinced myself that when the time came, they would see me, value me, and remember all I had given. But the day everything changed proved just how wrong I was. It began in a stuffy lawyer's office on a Thursday afternoon. The blinds were half drawn, casting striped shadows across the conference table. The air smelled faintly of coffee and old paper, that musty scent of legal files that had been sitting too long in cabinets. My parents sat on one side of the table, their hands folded neatly, eyes downcast like they were praying. My older brother, Eric, leaned back in his chair with a smug smirk on his face, arms crossed like he already knew the ending of this story. My younger sister, Rachel, fidgeted with her phone, tapping the screen with manicured nails, her impatience barely concealed. And me. I sat there with my palms sweating against the wood grain of the table, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. The lawyer cleared his throat, his voice calm, detached, like he'd read these words 1,000 times before. We are here today to finalize the terms of the Lane estate. As per the most recent draft of the will, all assets, including the family home, savings and investments, are to be divided between Eric Lane and Rachel Lane. Blink. The words hung in the air like smoke I couldn't clear. I waited for the rest, for my name, my portion, the acknowledgement that I too was part of this family. But nothing came. All, I repeated, my voice cracking. The lawyer looked up briefly, then back down at the paper. Yes, all. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. I gripped the edge of the table to steady myself. My throat burned and I forced out the words. There must be some mistake. My name isn't. Eric leaned forward, that smirk widening into something cruel. Guess they forgot you, sis. Rachel stifled a laugh, eyes still glued to her phone. I turned to my parents, desperate, searching their faces for reassurance. My mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat. My father cleared his throat. It was a mistake, he said quickly. Just a clerical error. You know how these things are. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. The document was signed, witnessed, and notarized. I assure you, this is no clerical error. My mother shot him a sharp look, but he shrugged, bound by the truth. My chest felt like it was caving in. You left me out. Entirely. After everything I've done for you. My father's jaw tightened. We'll fix it, he muttered. Don't make a scene. Don't make a scene. Those words cut deeper than the will itself. I thought of the nights I had driven my mother to her appointments when Eric was too busy and Rachel was out at parties. I thought of the weekends I spent scrubbing their house, cooking meals, paying their utility bills when their checks came up short. I thought of the years I put my own dreams on hold to be their caretaker when my father had surgery and my mother's arthritis flared. And yet here I was erased. The lawyer stacked his papers neatly, unaware of the war raging inside me. That concludes today's reading. Eric stood, stretching lazily, as if he'd just won a prize he hadn't even entered to win. Rachel slipped her phone into her purse, her lips curling into a satisfied smile. I couldn't move. My body was frozen in place, my mind replaying those words like a cruel echo. All assets to be divided between Eric Lane and Rachel Lane. I finally managed to whisper, "Why?" My mother placed a hand on my arm, her touch trembling. It wasn't intentional, Marissa. Truly. We'll fix it. But when I looked into her eyes, I didn't see regret. I saw something else, something darker. And when I turned to my father, his gaze slid away from mine, landing on the stack of papers he refused to look at again. That was when it hit me. This wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. The blood drained from my face. My body felt hollow, my soul cracking under the weight of betrayal. My parents, the people I had trusted above all else, had cut me out of their legacy, their lives, and their gratitude, and now they expected me to swallow their lie. Eric clapped a hand on my shoulder as he passed, leaning down just enough to whisper in my ear. "Guess you should have done more for them, huh?" His breath was hot, his tone mocking. Rachel laughed, a short, cruel sound, and followed him out of the office. I sat there, shaking, staring at the papers on the table. My parents gathered their things quietly, avoiding my eyes. And in that silence, a question burned in me, one that I couldn't hold back any longer. "What else have you taken from me?" I asked, my voice low, trembling with fury. For the briefest moment they froze. My mother's lips pressed together. My father's hand tightened on his briefcase. They exchanged a glance, quick, guilty, telling. And in that instant I knew. The will wasn't the only betrayal. Hang on, before I tell you what happened next, make sure you've subscribed and left your thoughts in the comments. This part gets intense. I barely remember the drive home from the lawyer's office that day. The words kept replaying in my head like a broken record. All assets to be divided between Eric Lane and Rachel Lane. My parents' silence in the car was worse than their words. Every mile, every turn, felt like I was moving farther and farther from the illusion of family I'd been clinging to for so long. When I finally got back to my small apartment, I sat in the dark for hours, staring at the wall. The betrayal had cracked something inside me, but as the hours dragged on, the cracks spread deeper, letting memories flood in. Memories I had buried, excused, explained away. Because if I was honest with myself, the signs had been there all along. I was the middle child, the invisible one. Eric, the oldest, was always the golden boy. The football player, the one my father called the pride of the family. Rachel, the youngest, was the baby. Spoiled, adored, shielded from every consequence. And me. I was the one who filled in the gaps. The one who cleaned up their messes. The one who picked up the slack when things fell apart. When my father had his heart surgery 8 years ago, Eric promised to be there. He showed up for one hospital visit, shook my father's hand, then disappeared back into his own life. Rachel cried pretty tears, posted photos online about how worried she was, and then left me at the hospital night after night. I was the one who sat by my father's bed, adjusting his pillows, holding his hand through the pain. I was the one who worked my day job and then came home to cook, clean, and manage the bills while my mother struggled with arthritis. And when the medical bills piled up, who do you think dipped into her savings account, giving up the down payment she'd been building for her own place? Me. Not Eric. Not Rachel. Me. I can still remember one particular night. It was winter, and the furnace had broken. My parents sat bundled in blankets, the house freezing cold. Eric was too busy to help, Rachel was too broke. So I called in a repairman and handed over my entire week's paycheck. My mother hugged me and whispered, "You're a blessing, Marissa." But a week later, when Eric stopped by with a new leather jacket, my father clapped him on the back and said, "That's my boy. Always looking sharp." I laughed it off, but inside it stung. I wasn't the one who got the praise. I was the one who got the chores. I told myself it didn't matter. That one day they would see. That one day, all those sacrifices would add up to something more than empty words. The little jokes. The jokes started small. "Marissa's the caretaker," my mother would say at family gatherings, smiling like it was a compliment. "Marissa doesn't need money, she's got a heart of gold," my father would add, and everyone would laugh. I laughed too, even though it hollowed me out inside. Because what they really meant was, Marissa will never ask for anything. Marissa will never demand. Marissa will always give. And I let them believe it. I let them take and take because the idea of saying no felt like betrayal. Funny, isn't it? How loyalty can blind you to the betrayals happening in real time. Looking back, the cracks were everywhere. Eric would brag about how he'd convinced Dad to rethink certain financial plans. Rachel would slip and mention conversations with Mom about the future. Conversations I was never invited into. One Thanksgiving, when the wine was flowing and laughter echoed through the dining room, I overheard Rachel giggle. "Eric, you're going to get everything anyway." Eric smirked and raised his glass. Finally, someone said it. When I confronted them later, they brushed it off as a joke. "Don't be so sensitive, Marissa," Rachel said, rolling her eyes. "And my parents?" They chuckled and changed the subject. I told myself it was nothing. But deep down I knew. 2 nights after the will reading, I drove past Eric's house. His truck was in the driveway, his porch light glowing. I don't even know why I stopped. Maybe part of me still needed answers. Maybe I thought, foolishly, that I could reason with him. I walked up to the door about to knock, when I heard voices through the open window. Rachel's voice, light and mocking. Marissa really thought she was getting something. After all these years. Eric's laugh was sharp. "I told Mom and Dad to cut her out. She's too soft. She'd waste it all anyway." My stomach dropped. Rachel giggled. Well, they finally listened. They finally listened. The words stabbed deeper than any knife. I staggered back from the window, my breath coming in short gasps. My heart pounded in my ears, and for a moment I thought I might collapse right there on the porch. So it hadn't been a mistake. It hadn't been oversight. It had been a plan. One my own brother had pushed for, one my parents had agreed to, one my sister had celebrated. I drove home in silence, my hands shaking on the wheel. And as I sat in the darkness of my apartment, the rage began to settle into something colder. Resolve. Before we go any further, click subscribe and let me know in the comments. What would you have done in my shoes? The words, "They finally listened," echoed in my mind for days, haunting me in the quiet hours of the night. I barely slept, and when I did, I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart racing with images of my siblings laughing at me, of my parents' eyes sliding away in guilt. I kept telling myself I needed proof, something more than overheard whispers and cruel smirks. But deep down I already knew the truth. Still I couldn't let it go. So, when the lawyer called me back to sign the acknowledgement of the will's reading, I went. My hands shook as I pushed open the heavy wooden door to his office. The air inside was just as stale as before, smelling faintly of ink and dust. My parents were there again, sitting stiffly like they wanted to get this over with. Eric leaned back in his chair, legs stretched out, whistling softly under his breath. Rachel twirled her hair, checking her reflection in a compact mirror. Her lips curling into that smug little smile that made my stomach twist. I sat down slowly, my palms pressed flat against the cool wood of the table. The lawyer cleared his throat. "We are here to finalize signatures for the will acknowledgement." As he spoke, I studied my parents. My mother kept her eyes down, fiddling with her scarf. My father's jaw was tight, his fingers tapping restlessly against the armrest. When the papers slid across the table toward me, I picked them up, my hands trembling. Line after line spelled it out in black and white. All assets divided between Eric Lane and Rachel Lane. No mention of me. No recognition of 34 years of loyalty, sacrifice, and devotion. Just absence. Is this really how it's going to be? I asked softly, my voice cracking. Eric smirked. "Don't be dramatic, Marissa." Rachel chuckled. "Yeah, it's not like you've done anything to earn it." My head snapped up. "Earn it?" My voice rose, shaking with fury. "I gave up my 20s for this family. I kept the lights on when the bills piled up. I was the one who—" "Enough," my father barked, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. Froze. The look in his eyes wasn't just stern, it was cold, dismissive, as if I wasn't even his daughter anymore. "This is final," he said flatly. "Don't embarrass yourself." Embarrass myself. I felt something inside me crack. The lawyer glanced between us nervously. "Perhaps we should give this a moment." But my mother shook her head quickly. "No. "We'll handle it." Handle it. That's what they always did, handle me. I signed the acknowledgement with shaking hands, the pen digging so hard into the paper I nearly tore it. My vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. When it was over, my parents stood and left quickly, avoiding my gaze. Eric clapped me on the shoulder as he passed, leaning close enough for only me to hear. "Guess you should have been a better daughter." Rachel's laughter followed him out the door like a dagger. I stayed behind, staring at the papers, my body trembling with rage. The lawyer, perhaps sensing the storm inside me, placed a hand on my arm. "Miss Lane, I shouldn't be telling you this, but—" He hesitated, glancing toward the door. "I keep copies of all drafts in my files. Every change, every note. If you want, I can show you." My breath caught. "Drafts?" He nodded, standing. "Wait here." The minutes dragged like hours as he disappeared into the back. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. When he returned, he carried a manila folder. He placed it in front of me and opened it. Inside were earlier versions of the will. My eyes scanned the lines quickly, my hands trembling. And then I saw it. Name. Clear as day. In the first draft, the assets were split 3 ways. Equal shares. My place secured. The later drafts showed changes, notes in the margins, crossouts, discussions. My share whittled down, adjusted, erased. And then finally gone. I felt my chest tighten, my throat burn. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't oversight. It was a choice. And worse, it had been a process. Deliberate. Calculated. I closed the folder slowly, my hands trembling with fury. The lawyer's eyes were sympathetic. "You didn't hear this from me. But you deserved to know." I nodded, unable to speak. I gathered the papers quickly, snapping photos with my phone before sliding them back into the folder. My proof. My weapon. When I left the office, the air outside felt colder, sharper, like the world itself had shifted. I sat in my car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, my knuckles white. My tears finally spilled, hot and bitter. This was my lowest point. Not just because I'd been erased from the will, but because I had been erased from their love, their acknowledgement, their family. I thought of the nights I sat by my father's hospital bed. The meals I cooked when my mother's hands couldn't. The money I poured into their home, their bills, their lives. And for what? To be crossed out on a piece of paper. To be dismissed as if I never mattered. But as I sat there, something shifted. Beneath the pain, beneath the heartbreak, a new fire began to burn. I wasn't going to let them erase me. Not from the will. Not from my future. I wiped my tears, lifted my chin, and whispered into the silence of my car. They thought they could cut me out. But I'm not done. Not even close. Before we go any further, click subscribe and let me know in the comments. What would you have done in my shoes? I couldn't stop looking at those photographs on my phone. The first draft of the will, with my name printed clearly alongside Eric and Rachel's. Then the second, where my share was slashed in half. Then the final version, the one they had signed and notarized, where I no longer existed. Every time I swiped through those images, the fire inside me grew hotter. They hadn't just forgotten me. They hadn't overlooked me. They had carved me out deliberately, erasing me like an unwanted mistake. And they thought I'd accept it. They thought I'd sign the acknowledgement, go home quietly, and fade into the background like I always had. But they had underestimated me. The next morning I called a law office downtown. My voice shook as I explained who I was, what had happened. They scheduled a consultation. Sitting across from the attorney, a sharp-eyed woman named Denise Alvarez, I laid out the story. My sacrifices. The betrayal. The draft. She listened silently, her pen scribbling notes. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair, folding her hands. "You've got a case," she said plainly. "But it won't be easy." I swallowed hard. "What do you mean?" Families fight dirty in probate court, she explained. They'll claim it was a mistake, or that you were provided for in other ways. They'll question your motives, your character, your history. And your siblings. If they've already been promised everything, they'll fight tooth and nail to keep it. Her eyes locked onto mine. You'll need proof. Concrete, undeniable proof. I pulled out my phone and slid it across the table. I have it. She studied the photos, her expression tightening. This is strong. Very strong. If you can get official copies of these drafts, we can argue fraud, undue influence, even deliberate misrepresentation. Fraud. Undue influence. Words that made my heart pound with a mixture of dread and relief. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the ground shift back under my feet. Over the next few weeks, I became a quiet investigator in my own family. I went through old bank records, receipts, and emails. I dug out the notes where I'd transferred money to my parents for medical bills, mortgage payments, even groceries. Every transaction told a story. Proof of my contributions, proof that I hadn't just been part of this family. I had been its backbone. I combed through photo albums, gathering pictures of me sitting beside my father in the hospital, me holding groceries at their door, me patching up the house when the roof leaked. Each image was another nail in the coffin of their lies. I even asked neighbors to write statements, the ones who saw me mowing the lawn, shoveling the snow, carrying groceries, while Eric and Rachel breezed in for quick visits with smiles and nothing more. At night, I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of paper, highlighting, filing, building a mountain of evidence. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about truth. But with every step forward came the doubts. What if the court sided with them? What if the judge believed their mistakes story? What if I ruined what little connection to my parents I had left? One night, as I sat staring at the piles of documents, I whispered into the empty room, "Am I about to lose my family forever?" But then I remembered Rachel's mocking voice. Marissa really thought she was getting something? After all these years. I remembered Eric's smirk. "Guess you should have been a better daughter." And I remembered my father's words at the lawyer's table. "Don't embarrass yourself." Well, I hadn't lost my family. They had lost me. Denise worked tirelessly, helping me organize the evidence. She requested official drafts from the lawyer's office, and when they came in, the proof was undeniable. My name clearly present, then deliberately erased. "Someone pressured your parents into changing this," she said firmly. "My guess, Eric. Maybe Rachel too. But the paper trail tells the story." We filed the petition. The court date was set. When I got the notice in the mail, I held it in my hands for a long time. My chest tightened, my stomach churned, but beneath the fear was something else. Resolve. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. This was about justice. About standing up for myself after a lifetime of being the one who carried everyone else. Coarse word spread quickly. My mother called me one evening, her voice trembling. "Marissa, why are you doing this? We'll fix it quietly. You don't need to drag us into court." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tight. "You had your chance to fix it quietly. You signed the papers." My father's voice boomed in the background. "She's ungrateful. After everything we've done." My chest burned with fury. "After everything you've done? You mean after everything I've done for you? And this is how you repay me?" He shouted something else, but I hung up. My hands shook, but my heart felt steadier than ever. Eric didn't bother calling. Instead, he sent a text. "You're making a mistake. You'll regret this." I stared at it for a long time, then typed back one word. "No." The night before the hearing, I sat at my kitchen table again. The evidence spread before me. My stomach churned, my hands trembled. I thought about walking away. About leaving it all behind. But then I looked at a photo. Me, 15 years old, standing in the kitchen with an apron on, cooking dinner while my parents sat at the table, tired but smiling. I had been holding this family together since I was a teenager, and they had erased me. No more. I gathered the papers into neat stacks, tucked them into a binder, and slid it into my bag. I walked to the window and stared out at the city lights, my reflection staring back. "They don't know who I am," I whispered. "But they will." The next morning I walked into the courthouse. The marble floors echoed under my heels, the air sharp with the scent of polish and old wood. Ahead of me, at the end of the hall, I saw them. My parents standing stiffly. Eric with his smug grin, Rachel with her arms folded and her chin high. They turned when they saw me. Eric smirked. Rachel rolled her eyes. And my father leaned close to my mother, his voice low but carrying just enough for me to hear. "She doesn't stand a chance." I smiled coldly, my hand tightening on the binder at my side. They had no idea what I was about to unleash. The courthouse smelled faintly of polish and tension. Every footstep echoed like a drumbeat as I made my way down the hall, binder clutched against my chest. My palms were damp, my stomach tight, but my eyes were sharp. Ahead of me, my family waited. My father stood stiff and broad-shouldered, his jaw set in stone. My mother wrung her hands, eyes darting nervously around the hall. Eric leaned against the wall, arms crossed, smirking like he was walking into a victory parade. Rachel scrolled lazily on her phone, as though this was just another inconvenience she'd win her way out of. I caught Eric's eye as I approached. He smirked wider. "Ready to embarrass yourself, Marissa?" I stopped in front of him, lifted my chin and said softly, "Not today." The courtroom itself was solemn, heavy with the weight of judgment. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, entered and the room rose. My knees wobbled, but I held steady. We sat. My attorney, Denise, arranged our papers neatly, her face calm but fierce. Across the aisle, my family's lawyer, a smooth, confident man named Blake, whispered with my parents, Eric and Rachel. They looked smug, relaxed. The judge glanced down at her notes. "We are here to hear the case of Marissa Lane versus the Lane estate." My heart pounded, but I forced myself to breathe. Blake rose first, his voice confident. "Your Honor, this case is nothing more than sour grapes. My client's daughter, Ms. Lane, has unfortunately been left out of the will, but as we all know, parents are under no legal obligation to divide assets equally. The will is valid. It was properly executed, and the claim that it was fraudulent is baseless." He sat down smoothly, smirking toward Denise as if the case was already closed. Then Denise rose. Her voice was steady, cutting through the air. "Your Honor, my client is not claiming that her parents lacked the right to distribute assets as they pleased. She is claiming fraud, deliberate exclusion, undue influence from her siblings, who manipulated her parents into erasing her from a will that she was originally included in." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge leaned forward. "Do you have proof?" Denise nodded once. "Yes, Your Honor. We do." Piece by piece we laid it out. First came the bank records, proof of my financial contributions over the years. Payments for mortgage, utilities, medical bills. Transactions written directly from my account into theirs. Ms. Lane was not merely a daughter, Denise explained. She was the caretaker, the financial backbone of this family. Then came the photographs. Me sitting at my father's hospital bedside. Me carrying groceries into their home. Me cooking meals while Eric and Rachel were nowhere to be found. Rachel rolled her eyes. Eric chuckled under his breath. But the judge's expression hardened. And then, finally, the drafts. Denise slid the copies across the table toward the judge. "Here, Your Honor, are 3 drafts of the will. The first, dividing assets equally among all 3 children, including Marissa. The second, reducing her share. And the final version, erasing her entirely." The handwriting in the margins matches Mr. Lane's. The pressure to change these drafts is clear. This was no accident. This was deliberate. The judge's eyes narrowed as she studied the papers. She looked up sharply at my father. Mr. Lane, do you dispute that these drafts exist? My father shifted, his jaw clenching. I don't recall. Denise's voice was sharp. Then perhaps your son can recall for you. He turned to Eric. Would you like to repeat what you told your sister, when you bragged that your parents finally listened and cut her out? Eric stiffened, his smirk faltering. That's not, I never. But his voice wavered. The judge's gaze hardened. Mr. Lane, I suggest you think very carefully about your words. For the first time, Eric looked rattled. As the evidence piled up, the smugness drained from my siblings' faces. My mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her eyes brimming with tears she didn't shed. My father's hands clenched into fists on the table, his jaw twitching as he realized the walls were closing in. When Denise rested our case, Blake scrambled to push back. Your Honor, these are family matters, emotional distortions. But the judge cut him off. I have seen enough. The room went silent. My chest rose and fell in quick, shallow breaths. The judge's voice was clear, unwavering. This court finds that Marissa Lane was deliberately and fraudulently excluded from the Lane estate. The will is invalid in its current form. Assets are to be redistributed equally among all 3 children, as the original draft reflected. Furthermore, given the evidence of undue influence and financial exploitation, the court awards additional damages to Ms. Lane. Additional damages. The words hit like a thunderclap. Not only was I getting back what was mine, I was getting more. Eric's face went pale. Rachel gasped. My mother covered her mouth with her hand, eyes wide. And my father? My father looked at me with a mixture of rage and something else. Fear. When the gavel struck, it was like the sound of chains breaking. I walked out of that courtroom with my head held high, binder clutched against my chest like a shield turned into a weapon. My family trailed behind me, their faces twisted with disbelief. Eric grabbed my arm in the hallway. You ruined us, he hissed. I yanked my arm free. No, Eric. You ruined yourselves. Rachel's voice trembled. Marissa, how could you? I cut her off, my eyes sharp. How could I? How could you? All those years I carried you. Carried Mom and Dad. And you erased me like I was nothing. This was never about money. This was about respect. And now, you'll never forget me again. I turned and walked away, their stunned silence following me down the hall. That night, I sat in my apartment, the city lights glowing through the window. For the first time in weeks I felt peace. Not because of the money, not because of the judgment, but because I had stood up for myself. They had tried to erase me. They had tried to make me invisible. But I had taken back my place. And more. I whispered into the quiet of my apartment, the words steady, strong. They thought a pen stroke could erase me. They thought a courtroom would scare me into silence. They thought I'd walk away empty-handed. But I didn't just take back what was mine, I took more. And now, every time they remember what happened, they'll know the truth. The daughter they tried to erase is the one who will never be forgotten. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. If you found yourself holding your breath, if you felt my pain and my victory, then I'd love for you to stay with me for the next story. Subscribe to the channel today, and together we'll keep uncovering the truths people try to hide.